Yeah, we're live. It is 7:15. Tonight we are going to talk about big turbo or small turbos and big motors. Big motors and small turbos. And the reason I want to talk about that is because, for the most part, we as people, as performance enthusiasts, don't think that they go together, particularly when we see how much better things work when we put a bigger size turbo or let's even call it the right size turbo. But we need to specify all that stuff because it's like long runner and short runner, big cam, small cam, all of that stuff. 3/4 race cam, whatever. So big turbo and small turbo is relative because it depends on the displacement of the motor that you're talking about, and not only the displacement of the motor, I would argue, because that's what I want to talk about tonight. Also the power output of that motor, because we see displacement alone doesn't tell us it doesn't tell us what carburetor the thing needs any more than it tells us what turbo the thing needs, because we can have a big disparity in the power outputs with the same displacement. We can have a 454 that makes 300 horsepower. We can also have one that makes you can pick whatever number you want, 900 or 1,000 horsepower. So it's a big variation there. Same displacement, so if you do your displacement calculation for your carburetor, a 300 horsepower version of that motor doesn't need the same carburetor that a 1,000 horsepower version of that motor does. And it's the same thing with turbos. And so we need to talk about that. We need to figure out what we're trying to do. And this is what this is the point that I'm trying to make, is I think that there are applications where you would run a small turbo on here, particularly if you're looking for boost response, which we all are. So I ran a test a while back where I ran a couple of different turbos on it, but we ran a single GT45 turbo, and we ran it on a 454. We ran it on a modified 454, but I don't think that was the right combination for that. So first of all, I want to make sure, sending out good thoughts and prayers for the guys, for everybody that's going through the hurricanes nonsense over there in Florida. I hope that hope that everybody's okay and everybody's staying safe. But back to our discussion here on the turbo stuff. So we have a 454. This one had a cam and different kind of heads and stuff on it. I ran it with the GT45 turbo, which we would normally select for something like a 4.8 or a 5.3. I've run it on even smaller motors than that. We ran on Honda stuff and it works fine. It's about a 700 to 750 horsepower kind of turbo. And the problem is that I use that designation to say, hey, like this turbo is capable of supporting 750 horsepower. On what motor? Because it probably won't do that on this big block. And the reason that it won't do that is, when you look at a turbo, the way that I look at it, we have a cold side flow and a hot side flow. It's nice when both of those things are balanced. And then if you're trying to max out the turbo, that you max out both of those at the same time. That's hard to do because, if we run that on a really small motor, we're probably not going to max out the hot side of that. We probably could max out the cold side of it. And on a smaller motor, a lot of times those turbos will make more power. Again, depends also on how well that turbo is at running higher pressure ratios. Depends on what the map looks like, essentially, on the compressor side. Does it excel at running lots of pressure? Like, does it work well supporting 700 horsepower, 750 or 800 horsepower at whatever boost would be required to do that on a smaller motor, like a 3-liter motor or a 2-liter motor, as compared to a 4.8 or a 5.3, or in our case, a 7.4-liter motor? Does it, because those NA motors are not going to make as much power. They're probably not going to make 500 NA horsepower like the big block does. So it might be that they make half of that, or 300 or something. And so the amount of boost it's required, so that's going to just put them in a different spot on the map. Is it good there? We don't know that, especially with a lot of these turbos, for these offshore turbos, because there's no maps for them. But if you run it and it works well, then it works well. Some of the other stuff, the Garrett stuff, some of the more modern stuff, good wheels and compressors and design and all that stuff. They're a lot better than the same size turbo that we get from offshore stuff. But we're still going to do that because we can't afford a $2,000 or $3,000 turbo. We can afford a $200 or $300 turbo. But on the GT45, if we look at it and think, okay, that's a 700 or 750 horsepower turbo. We ran that on the big block, and when we ran that on the big block, it did indeed make over 700 horsepower. We ran it at about, the peak boost was almost 10 pounds, but it fell off out at the horsepower peak to about 8.5. It just doesn't want to support the boost level, even though we're commanding that. And it made 710 horsepower and like 750 foot-pounds. But it made more than 700 foot-pounds at like down at 3,600. And had we loaded it lower than that, it would have continued to make over 700 foot-pounds. Because one of the good things about that turbo is that it would have really good response rate on that size motor because of its sizing relative to the displacement and power output of the bigger motor. That's one thing. They make a lot more horsepower or torque down low than a smaller motor does. So that translates directly into boost response. So you could get this small turbo on that motor to make essentially immediate boost. I don't know that it would do it at 600 RPM or the idle speed or whatever. But if you stepped on the gas at whatever the converter was, it probably would have all of the boost available. And even more so had we not modified it in hopes of pushing power out at a higher engine speed, because that's what we were trying to do with this particular motor. So had we just done this, and this is the thing that I would recommend, I don't think where we made over 700 horsepower with this turbo, which by the way, at 8.5 pounds of boost of positive pressure, we had 22.5 pounds of back pressure. So we were getting, you could see we were way beyond where I probably would be comfortable running that turbo, certainly for any length of time. It would not be good at that, the difference in boost pressure versus back pressure, that pressure ratio, that's too much. It's too much back pressure. And it shows us that we have too small of a turbo on them. But do we? So my point is, if I was going to try to run that turbo on a 454, I probably wouldn't do it on one that was already starting at 500. Because when we put a bigger turbo on it, we jump right up to 900 or 1,000 or more with the right size turbo on it. And that's what you'd expect. Where I would run a GT45, or where I would think about running something like a GT45 on a 454, would be on a stock one with a stock fuel injection manifold on it, the EFI manifold with naturally bigger injectors to support the power level, but maybe just a cammed version of that. Maybe that makes like 100 horsepower less NA, so be down in the low 400 range, the way that we test it, down in the low 400 range with some kind of cam in it, and then you just wanted to run like 7 pounds on it. And so by decreasing the amount of power that you make naturally aspirated and lowering the boost with, like, let's say we had a controller that would just make 7 pounds and not have a falling booster because we were running out of turbo. But if you just had 7 pounds and you were running this thing at, like, let's say 600 horsepower, you go from 400 to 600, that's actually going to be a very, very responsive combination. And that turbo is going to come on immediately. You're going to be able to use that for, if a guy wants to use that for towing or something. Again, I would have to look at the back pressure on that thing to see if that's the thing that I would want for towing. But it would certainly come on boost immediately, like if you had it in a Chevelle or a C10 truck or something like that. It would actually be a good combination. And I would argue that, like we have discussed many times here on this channel, that having the boost come on, even though we're limited in, it's not 1,000 horsepower deal, having the boost come on and be responsive and be fun, and watching the boost gauge move when you're just rolling into the throttle is going to be more enjoyable for you while you're out driving around, because you're going to be able to do that. You're going to be able to sample that all the time. You don't have to wait for the turbo to come on. You don't, if you want 1,000 horsepower dually truck or whatever, you certainly can make that, because you just put a turbo on that's capable of that. it's going to offer a different type of response rate than this smaller turbo does, and should be chosen. Obviously, this is the point that I'm trying to make. Should be chosen for a different application. If you put a S475 or an S480 or an 88 or whatever it is you're picking, that's the big boy turbo, and you want to go into 4-digit stuff, that's not the one that you get. That's not an S, or a GT45 is not in comparison to an S475, S480, whatever. It's not in comparison. It's not even in the same like market consideration as a 1,000 horsepower turbo is, nor should it be. But I would argue also that those turbos are not in consideration for the kind of thing that I'm talking about. If you have a stock or mild, like if it was a stock motor and it made, when we run these Gen 6 454s, they make about 370. And a Gen 5, even less, like 330. So a 330 horsepower motor, a GT45 is really good for that. That's like a 5-liter Ford or a small block Chevy or a 4.8, like a stock 4.8. And you wouldn't think twice about running it on a 4.8. It's just that on the 454, we don't have to wait till 5,500 RPM or 5,700 RPM or something like we would with a 4.8, like we would with the smaller one. We don't have to wait that far until it makes peak power. And so with the big motor, we would have whatever you set the boost at, you'll have all the boost, and it'll be immediate. That combination would drive more like a positive displacement blower, but one that's load based, because it's not just there immediately, but it would essentially be there immediately. Because as soon as you go to step on the gas, you're going to provide enough exhaust energy and enough load on that thing, especially if you have it in a heavy vehicle, that you're going to have boost immediately. And I think that would be a really fun thing, and to show people, it'd be a fun one to drive around in, having immediate boost like that and having all of that torque, because you'd have like 700 foot-pounds basically everywhere. It would be quite honestly, it'd be kind of awesome. So I think that there's something to be said for putting the small turbo on the big motor, as long as you're not trying to make really big NA power with the big motor and then big boosted power with the motor. Size the turbo accordingly, get all of that response, and do that part of it. Do the early part of the curve. When you're focusing on making that more efficient, you do it in a way that does that. Small turbos. Let's see. For responsive street use, would you pick a small turbo over a bigger one for responsive street use? Could be for any motor. Doesn't matter. Also, I have not this shirt, but I have shirts available now, both red and blue. The hashtag wrong cam shirts are available now. They're back in stock. I ordered a bunch of them, so I have a couple of boxes of them. So I have different sizes now, not just the 3X. I think I only had 3Xs in red or blue left, but now I've got everything. Do you know anything about gasoline compound turbos? Yeah, I have videos up where we did an LS, and I've also I did one on my Sprint. What is the big problem with back pressure GT45 on a 454? Well, you start getting high temperatures, and I would think that it also would make the thing more prone to detonation if you have high back pressures. What is a choke with a turbo? Thinking about a T6 S480, that would work on a big motor. That works. The GT45 is good on a 4-liter V8. Yep, or a 4200. Yep. For remote turbo location, have you seen a separate oil tank pump filter be installed? I've seen remote pumps. That happens all the time. I've never seen a dedicated oiling system done for a remote turbo. I think it could be done. This one that I ran that I'm talking about was a single GT45. A twin GT45 would support 1,500 horsepower. So that wouldn't be limiting. That would be less responsive and more toward the big end stuff. T3, T4 hybrid with a 5.7 AR on the truck. 302, Redline 5000, 30-pound injectors be enough. I don't know what your power output is. 30-pound injectors are not going to feed very much power on a V8 on a turbo application. But your sizing of a T3, T4 hybrid, if it's is it a single turbo or a twin? Because a single T3 hot side turbo is probably not going to be a good not going to be a good choice. And I was gonna do. I got a message from Brian. 30, 16, 30-pound injectors are only going to support 480 horsepower on an NA motor, and so on a supercharged one, a lot less than that, like 75 or 80% of that. So 360 horsepower. It's not really worth doing. I mean, you need more injectors than that. Ever use a hybrid turbo for a 302, something like a GT 3582 or S362 would be perfect. I agree with Bill. I don't think I would use that small of a turbo. A GT 3582 would be fine, or this. We've used this GT45 on lots of very, very mild 5 liters, and it works good. Wales is in the house. Neil, what's going on? I'm only going to run one turbo on my small block. I only want 500 horsepower for the time being. I can always change things around. You can, you particularly if you put a T4 something on there, and you could go to a bigger T4 usually, as long as whatever the packaging around that doesn't limit you from. Sometimes what you run into is not so much the turbo, but a lot of times the bigger housing requires then a bigger exhaust and a downpipe and stuff. And so sometimes that can be problematic. Michigan, what's going on, Woodies? The only downside to small turbos is it limits you to 14 PSI because the mount really curves upward after that. Yeah, I don't know about the boost number. I don't look at that nearly as much because you couldn't run 14 pounds on this big block that I did with that GT45. It just won't support that. It won't. That would be like 1,000 horsepower, and it just won't do that. So that's why I like to look at it in terms of power. Don't see why a remote oiling system wouldn't work. Might even be ideal. It can. You could do a separate reservoir and feed an electric remote pump and feed that and have it run through another cooler and stuff. All of that is possible. I don't know how many people are doing it that way, though. Mine wasn't running well, and I swapped a 7875 for a 70 on a 351. A 7875 is fine for a 351. The problem's not the problem; it's the attitude about the problem. I need equally otherwise similar motor, which turbo would make more power at boost level. A GT45 is a more powerful turbo than a CX Racing 76, but not by a lot. eBay has a plethora of EcoBoost 3.5 liter twins. Have you seen them on a 302? No, I would think that those would be pretty small on a 302. WFO builds, our twin GT45 6-liter boost controller didn't open the wastegates and it made 21 pounds. That's going to be some power. I'd love to see what it made at that boost level. What do you know? What if you tell me what the I can speculate at this if you want it, if you kind of want to have an idea. If you tell me what combination your 6-liter is, if you haven't run that NA yet on a dyno, and you just tell me what the combination is, I can tell you pretty close to what it would make NA, and then we can figure out what it makes. You just multiply it by, you know, the gain is going to be 1.5. If you multiply it by 2.5, you know what it makes, or have a pretty good idea. Small turbos with instant response are right on the street. It's way easier to make any combination ET on a drag strip with smaller turbos. Trans brake and high stalls are not needed. It survived to see another day. That's good. The MAC valve was plumbed backwards into the wastegate. So it's doing its job by holding the wastegate closed. Single GT45 on a 351 with a 210 cam, legal AFRs, ported stock log motor intake could make a nice 600 horsepower. Yeah, 600 horsepower would be pretty easy with that kind of combination. I would get a diesel power source, turbonator, VGT, exhaust housing, and eliminate the compromise. Not cheap, but worth it. You're not going to, if you're talking about the compromise between the two turbos I'm talking about, a variable vane turbo is not going to do that. It's not going to go from, it won't have the response of a GT45 and then the power potential of a S475 or S480 on the big end. It helps, but not that much. What do I need to do to my stock 98 Camaro LS1 if I wanted to add a small turbo, or should I just start with a cam and work my way up? A camshaft is going to help you either way. So a camshaft on the LS is normally the thing that people start out with, but you're going to have to do injectors in a tune. So when you do that, put big enough injectors in when you do your cam. Be thinking about injectors for a turbo. So put 80s or something big in there. Even though the cammed LS1 might not need that yet, when the turbo comes, it will need that. GT45 is the best turbo. Not if Matt has anything to say about it. A 7875 is a better turbo, especially the Gen 2 stuff. It is a better turbo than a GT45. But the GT45 still does what the GT45 does. So it's, you know, it makes all the boost. And every time I've tried it on anything, I think we've run that turbo on lots of stuff. I still want to tow while running a 35 on a 7,000-pound vehicle. Cool. GM 63 V6. I have a cam on the shelf. 226, 234, 108. Is that a big cam? Yes, it is. What is the 173 cubic inches? Okay, let me do some math here. Yeah, because that would only be a 230-inch V8. So that's pretty small. A 226 cam is pretty good size on that because it's just relative to the individual cylinder size. And so that's a pretty healthy cam. Have twin 0mm turbos. The boost never comes on. They feel about speed engineering truck twin turbo kits. I don't know. I've never tested anybody's kit, so I don't really have any experience, and so I don't have any insight in that. Which has turbo higher power potential? I think a 7875 has more peak power potential than certainly the 7875 that I have. That's the Gen 2 will definitely make more power than a GT45 will, and by a pretty good amount. I don't know about the first one. I don't know about the first cast one. I have a couple of Borg Warner S363s, SXEs, a couple of 369s, all T4s. Was planning on running 363s on the 6.2 liter. And you're running those, Corey, you're running those as twins, right? If you're running those as twins, that's going to work good. LS headed 5-liter versus Coyote turbo test. I think we would just do it as a 4.8. Although I guess we could bore it, huh? What do you think about a 224R? Is that a camshaft, Oscar? I'm assuming that it's 224 at 50. I have a 99 Trans Am with an LS1, and I have a D1 SC I'm installing. Good stock injectors handle 6 to 7 pounds. No, they can't. Because that's almost a 50% increase in power. And the stock injectors, I don't think, have 50% worth of margin in them. How does compression affect the AR size of the turbo? It doesn't alter the AR of the turbo. I was told that with 11.5 to 1, my 5.3, it's better to go with a 991 AR over an 83 in a twin 7070 application. So why would they say that? And who said that? Maybe what they're thinking, this might be their thought process, is that when you add compression to something, if it was 10 to 1, let's say, and now it's 11.5 to 1, you've added power everywhere. You've added power down low, which is what they're concerned about with the turbo. You've added power everywhere. So you've made the motor more powerful. So luckily for you, you made it more powerful down low. The boost is going to be more responsive with the more compression. So now they may be thinking that now you can change the AR from a 91, from an 83 to a 91, and still have the same effective boost response as you would have had with the 83 and the lower compression. Maybe they're thinking that, I guess. I just tied my downpipe into my tailpipe tonight. Drove to a car show last weekend. Still need to do injectors, wastegate, blow-off valve and tuning, stock 4.8, 78, 75. Gen 2.5, okay. Only planning on 4 to 5 pounds. Okay, I'm going to take a picture of that where it says I'm only planning 4 to 5 pounds. And then I want you to come back after you get it all running and then tell us how much boost you're running. 6-liter, 440 wheel horsepower. Let's see. Six-liter, 440 wheel horsepower with no boost. We were trying to test pull for 8 pounds when it made 21. The dyno wasn't logging. So you have your 6-liter was making 440 wheel horsepower? That's a lot. So that could be 1,100 at 21 pounds. Hit it with something middle of the road, run compound and anti-lag. There you go. What do you think of the 224? You can't keep asking the same question. I don't know what the other specs are on that. I don't know who makes that cam because I haven't tested it, so I'm not familiar with it. What if you don't care about response and you just want the tire spin to start halfway through first and not stop until 5th? You can get a responsive one. Deca 80s are usually the go-to injector for this kind of stuff, yeah. I really don't care for the 78, 75. By the time I would be at 78 millimeters, I would want more exhaust flow. Okay. And there are other bigger turbos, like an S475, especially the T6 that most people sell, would have a lot of exhaust flow. Did you already talk about sequential turbos? No, we didn't. Weren't talking about that tonight. I mean, that's primarily a factory thing, but very cool. Lots of plumbing rigmarole to make that happen, but it is kind of cool. What have you seen as the max horsepower capable for a 5.3 with a 78, 76, 1.25? I don't know. I've never tried that exact turbo, but I would guess that that's probably 1,000 horsepower turbo. A single mount center, 88 millimeter. Feed it with dual 3 inches from each bank, or 2.5. Also for the T6 flange, should I go dual 3-inch? Seems big. Dual 2.5, single 3-inch, and just connect the two. When I run the T6, we run the Y pipe into a single 3-inch V band, and then we have adapters that go from 3-inch V band to a T3 or T4 or T6. I'm not saying that that's optimum, but feeding it with 2.5s, if the opening in your divided housing is not as big as a 2.5, doing a 3 and necking it down, I don't think is going to gain you anything. 224, single pattern, 112. I don't know. I haven't run that. I don't normally put single pattern cams and stuff, but it will work. It will do what that camshaft does. I just have never tested it. My guess is that's going to be a step down from the sloppy stage 2, which is a 228, 230. So it's going to be maybe make a little more low speed power than the sloppy stage 2 does, but less peak power. I like the idea of running water misters in front of the cooler. 2.5 would be better for response than 3-inch. Yeah, it might be on the. I honestly don't know how much of a difference that makes on the hot side when it's all feeding the turbo, but sustained boost on the stock bottom end for lower IATs. Oh, for running the water misters, yeah. Little turbos, high back pressure, retained heat in the chamber, required lower timing and higher EGTs becomes the issue in cranking up a quick spool setup. If you want to have high compression with turbos, do I have to use E85? Yes. And I don't recommend you trying to have high compression with a turbo because it's unnecessary. Unless you're doing it in a class where you're trying to maximize the output of some given turbo size. Let's say they restrict it to a 75 millimeter turbo. Then you make the very best 75 millimeter turbo that you can, and then you do everything to the motor also to make it as efficient as it can possibly be, including high compression. Otherwise, I don't recommend people doing that for like a street car. There's no reason to do that. The 4 to 5 pounds will turn into 45 pounds. I think minimum is got to be 7, right? I mean, do they sell even smaller springs than the green 7-pound spring for TurboSmart? Bill, is there any way to contact me? Yes. Yeah, if you have questions, you should ask them. There's a lot of sharp guys here that know things that I don't know, so this is a good place to get answers. Aren't the Texas Speed LSX cams called TR224, TR228, but later when they went to the split duration cams? I don't know. I don't know that much about their cam profiles. But yeah, Bill, you can always email me. Gen 3 Coyotes are making 500 wheel horsepower, fairly basic bolt-ons. 1100 is a lot for a McLeod twin disc clutch. Yeah, it's a lot, and it's also a lot of torque if the turbo comes up right away. So if you have 21 pounds at 4,000, that's going to be a lot of boost. Feel free for a screenshot of 4 to 5 pounds daily driver, Grand Wagoneer that weighs 4,700 pounds. Just want turbo noises. Good. That'll be good. You can send me videos and I'll want to see that. And at 4 or 5 pounds, it will be amazing. I mean, it will feel so much better than NA that you'll just love it. Got a 35-gallon tank. E85 still wouldn't last long while under. Yeah, not if you're under boost a lot. It won't. Sustain boost while towing upgrade. So maybe a low boost map for pump. Auxiliary cooling methods like the Misters. Yep. Mr. Twisted Sister. Milton is giving you guys all the boost. You guys stay safe out there. BM123 is cool. What is that, Neil? Am I not familiar? Is that a designation? A GT45 would be plenty in the Vortex Suburban. It would be. I need to ask Mike Davis what he has in his. I think he has his on 8.1, so his might be an S475. There's tomfoolery in the turbo measurements for those classes. Well, there's just everybody's gray interpretation of what that size is. Because then you can, not every 75 millimeter wheel is going to be the same flow. And not everybody's hot side is going to be the same. The shape of the compressor housings, and are they ported, and all of that stuff. There's a lot that goes into making a turbo, particularly wheels. If guys can, like the guys that are getting rid of the center nut attachments and stuff, and they're essentially making the wheel bigger by having more blade area, by getting rid of that big thick center section. Has a similar cam to the 224 on my 2000 Camaro. Ported heads, long tubes, made 420 wheel horsepower through a 256. Nice. Any way to contact you? You can send an email. Yeah, I'll put my email address. QRB16. But like I said, this is a really good place because I'm here for an hour or so. And I wouldn't have somebody get me on the phone for an hour. That's not going to happen. Not because I'm, think I'm important. I don't have that much time. What do you think is the horsepower limit on a 6.2 aluminum block? I don't go over 1,000 horsepower on those. I think you're already there. Got 2 of them on Facebook deal. Other one is going on my 2500 with a Truck Norris. Cool. Yeah, Brian, that's the other way that you can get away with the bigger turbo is torque converter. The good turbo noises only start at 7 psi. They don't make the good noises aren't at 4 or 5 psi. I have run like 4 and 5 psi stuff. In fact, I did it on the Big Bang motor, and it at 5 psi it made an amazing power gain. All you need to do is drill a couple holes in the manifold before the wastegate to achieve your 4 psi. I have a 408 stroker, 823 heads, BTR 400 small twin turbo cam. Yeah, twin 66s would be more responsive. The other thing that I would do is I think that cam is way too big for what you're doing. I almost purchased a 99 E300, the ultimate diesel, an OM606. Do rolling burnouts. So if my compression was 9-to-1 with twin turbos, I don't know turbos yet. Can I use regular, or what gas should I use? Yeah, you can use, if your compression is 9-to-1, you can run boost. You just have to balance. 9-to-1, people run stuff all the time on pump gas. So you just have to balance the static compression, the boost level, the air temperature. You need to run an intercooler, and then the octane of the fuel and the timing. All of those things need to be balanced so that it doesn't detonate itself. Brains trust. There's no possessive there. Interesting technology. I'm always trying to learn more about parts, upgrade over the basic journal ones. The newer Garrett wheels are pretty impressive flow compared to the earlier designs. I don't trust horsepower numbers without maps. The Garrett stuff is a new, like the expensive Garrett turbos are really nice, and they have the potential to make more power than the other junk that I usually use. Almost at 1100 wheel horsepower on. Is it a centrifugal LS3? I don't know. That might not be as bad because you're not making anywhere near as much torque as the turbo stuff does. Did some Dynajet testing a D16 Honda. Yes, you had me at D16. 66 millimeter T4. Mounted 2 inches from the head on the shortest exhaust manifold I could make versus a 30-inch 4-1 header. Same turbo, made the same horsepower. Response rate was days apart. So are you saying that the short exhaust manifold was more responsive than the header was? And I'd like to see what that header looked like what the tubing diameter was and stuff. The BorgWarner EFR series turbos are good. Yeah, and any of the modern stuff is a lot better than, you know, a typical S475 or a GT45. I wonder how old that GT45 design is. What's more efficient for quick spool, small turbos, or a roots blower? Yes, if you use the roots blower to spool the turbos, it works very well. You won't beat a positive displacement blower for boost production, for like how fast it happens. I remember doing that with Jim Bell while he said, here, go drive this excursion. And, you know, other magazine guys have driven it and they come back telling me, oh yeah, it's boosted. It feels great, blah, blah, blah. I said, Jim, here's the test I did. He said, oh God, because he knows I'm weird. I said, here's what I was trying to do. I said, I drove it and it made boost and it's a lot better. I said, blah, 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 blah. I said, but here's what I wanted to do. I was driving down the road, cruising down the road on the street, and I wanted to see if I could get to wide open throttle before I saw a boost on the gauge. And I said, I wasn't able to do that. I said, so that's pretty good boost response. He said, yeah, these things work pretty good. He said, you're the only one that's ever done that. I said, I know, but that's because I'm weird. Edward, I don't know what you mean by thoughts. Anybody know why a 5.7 Hemi would break the tips off of the intake valves? Also, EFR BorgWarner turbos are the best. Okay. Did you miss a shift? Did it like the keeper and did it pull the tip off maybe because of an over rev? Otherwise, it's got to be an extension thing or a compression thing. And if it's a compression thing, I mean, I guess you could side load it and do that, but I don't know how that happens with everything bolted down. If there was a piston to valve issue, did the other side of the valve hit something? I did a T3 on a 2003 Focus, 5.5 PSI gate. The power gain was phenomenal. It was. I put the small turbo on my Focus, and it was amazing. And that was after having the Jackson Racing Supercharger on it. And we even put the M62 on it, the big boy. And it made like 235 or something at the tire, which was fun. But the turbo was just like 7 pounds on the turbo, and it was just so much nicer. Have a look at the Rover K Series turbo manifold. Looks horrible, but still works better than having. He is weird, and by he I mean me. Every time I would go in there and talk to Jim, he would say, "Okay, look, here's the data," and I'd go through the data. I'm gonna go, "What about this?" He goes, "You're the only guy that sees that." He goes, "I talked to 4 other guys from the magazines," and he said, "How do you look at that?" And I said, "Well, it just jumps right out at you, right?" He said, "Yeah, I almost didn't want to show you that page because I knew that because we know it because we're there doing the tests." But I said, "Look, I said, you guys have taught me well." Get away! What's going on? Frank Zappa. That's right. I've got the same turbo, Airworks BorgWarner S475, an aluminum 5.3 that I previously had an iron 6-liter. Seems to make a lot more heat. Same heads as well, 798s. Made my inlet R2 high. I don't know, like, which one are you saying? The 5.3 makes more heat? Because that wouldn't make sense. The back pressure should be higher on the 6-liter, but on S475, that should be like 1-to-1. I mean, it shouldn't be very high. Alan, what's going on? Seems to put a lot more heat under the hood. That's weird. Ooh, sitting there idling. He's broken 3 valves so far. Runs about 2 days, then breaks again. So where are the valves breaking? Are the valves sticking in the guides? It's interesting to realize that a K24 stroker can have more displacement than an RB26. Certainly more than an RB20, right? A Junkyard 4.8 and a Mitsubishi Fuso ME whatever 30650 turbo will hold up. I don't know what that is. Like, what did it come off of? Copperhead turbos are cheap. Just get a good eBay. Yeah, it's again, I don't remember the last time I got a turbo from the wrecking yard anymore. I don't do that. Have you ever worked with Mercedes V8s? I've never run one on the engine dyno. I've seen a bunch of them run on chassis dynos. The guys from the show shop used to also do some Mercedes later on, and they did the Kleeman blower kits and those kinds of things on them, and they're pretty cool. And I like them. In fact, whenever I see Mercedes at the wrecking yard, I always stop and see if it's a compressor. But I've never run one on the engine dyno. Small turbo paired with a small cam sounds like a good street combo. I know, and that's what I'm looking at on the 2.2 Dodge is, am I going to want to stay with the stock turbo, or am I going to want to put something that's laggier? Make room on the bench for a guy with a wrench. Wow, we're all into rhyming and stuff. Have an M113.54 AMG drivetrain. Oh, that's cool. I always like the AMG Hammer. And a friend of mine in school his dad was a doctor, and they had a 240Z, and he also had a 6.3 liter sedan, which was fast. It's breaking just under the keepers. Have tried 2 different manufacturers, new springs and retainers. The 6.9s were even more powerful than the 6.3 was. Yeah, that was basically the big block. It's new, but goes on a flat nose Mitsubishi delivery truck. What is the motor that it's on is the thing that I'm interested in. And what is the factory power output of that turbo? M13 is similar to the LS as it has a cam and a crank, like all motors. There's no advancements in timing. I mean, no variable cam. We used to get Saab turbos. Yeah, we used to get the SVO turbos way back too when they were plentiful. Dean, we are all weird. Look what we're spending time doing. Worked on a 280 SEL with a 6.3 liter. I did put together. I actually built the Mercedes engine. I built I bought my mom a 230 SL way back for Christmas. And in fact, I sold my MR2 to do it. And the block froze because it didn't have antifreeze in it. And so I rebuilt another one and got it in the car and got it running and stuff. And I didn't know anything about it, but I did know about 240Z motors or 260Z motors also and 280s. And that is basically a copy of that motor. This one was mechanically fuel injected, but still is kind of the same deal. I'd keep the 2.2 stock and put a bigger turbo on the 2.5 and run that when you get more with the 2.2. I am thinking already of swapping, and I don't even have I'm not even driving the car around yet. We just did the opposite: big turbo, big wastegate on a K24 with low boost, holds boost steady to red line. Big turbo, big wastegate, low boost is an underrated setup. But isn't it soft down low? how much clearance are you running between the retainer and the guide, and what kind of seals are you using? Yeah, do you have retainer to seal clearance issues? Is that the problem? Something's binding up. Sob turbos used to be a common source, yeah, and also the diesel Ford turbos also were fairly common. So a video of a stock 318 Magnum with a single GT3582 knockoff turbo make 390 at the wheels on 13 PSI. Would you see any issue with using that turbo? He said it would spool really quick. That's about a 600 horsepower turbo. I'm surprised that it took well, maybe not. What does that thing make at the tire stock NA? 13 PSI seems like a lot. I just pretend the stock LS cam is already a performance cam. It's compared to a small block Chevy. And actually, if you look at the video that I have up where we ran the 5.3 cam and then compared it to all the factory cams, an LS1 cam is a performance upgrade to a LM7 camshaft, the LM7 and the LR4 and the early LQ4 camshaft, which they all share the same ones. Any of those other aftermarket cams, LS1, LS2, LS3, LS6, obviously LS7 and LS9, even LSA, even the HO cam that I call it, the L33 cam, all of those are better than the smallest cam. Turbos were like $40 back in the day. They were. It was cheap. It is, but it spins at 9,000, so full boost at 4,000 doesn't really matter. Yep. How do you think Eric's cam challenge will go? I think he's going to generate some kind of data. It's not going to determine anything. It's not going to determine who's the best cam guy in the land. Chinese eBay whole set turbos. I used a lot of whole set stuff too, because the guys from HP Performance used to use whole sets in their kits, and we used a bunch of them. Are you doing a t-shirt with a cam? Yeah, we are. I posted a thing on social media that the cam and the shirt are $199, or if you just want a shirt, they're $20. I really want a ZF 5-speed manual swap for my van. How much wood could a woodchuck chuck? That's right. I bet he just got an LS 6-liter running for 400 complete, and we're going to boost it. Nice. That's a good deal. Can a T28 turbo on one bank feed both banks on an engine? I tried to do that already on a big block, but I was unsuccessful. But yeah, Saab already did that in their factory one. And so that we know that works. You just have to get enough exhaust energy to the turbo to get it to spool up. One bank, though, is hard to get that to happen. So you have to size the turbo to make that happen. But yes, that is possible. Greg, I've seen the retainer hit on the inside of the rocker if the push rods are not set to the correct geometry. Wheel horsepower 170 to 175. Okay, so 390 that's about right. I was addicted to precision turbos. All the precision stuff that I've ever run. In fact, Jimmy has a precision turbo that I gave him that we used on the the Suzuki Kazashi, and I put it on an LS. We ran it on a few different things, and his is making I don't know more than 700 at the tire, and it's either a 62 or a 67. I can't remember now, but it did really well. And then I have that 76, 75, I think is what they called it, but it was a billet wheel and the CEA stuff and triple ball bearing or whatever. And that way I used that turbo for hundreds of tests, and it worked really good. Camchology is going to be like Engine Masters. Just because it makes the best power number doesn't mean it works in the real world. And also I think it's going to be more luck of the draw. I think the fuel trims wouldn't like only one bank having a turbo. Well, you would have to do sequential, and you'd have to do individual trims, and I wouldn't run it certainly in closed loop. The The Disco Potato. I wonder how many of those they sold. GT28 RS. That's right. Best turbo ever made. They didn't run Disco Potatoes on the Grand Nationals, right? That was more Honda stuff and more import stuff. One bank pushing one turbo to boost two banks leads to one head gasket having an issue. I don't think that that's the case. I don't think that that cylinder head and that side are going to act any different than if it was boosted. And I don't think that the other side getting boost is going to be any different than it getting boost from a blower. I don't think it knows that. And I don't think that the head gasket situation is going to be an issue. I don't think any of that's going to be a problem. I think the issue is sizing the turbo to get it to respond, to spool up and make boost. I think once you get that, I think all the rest of it's fine. I think you just need to, like, you're going to have to do individual tuning, obviously, and make that work. And now that I think about it, I need to go back and look. I can't remember. We might have been trying to do it with a carburetor. But the thing is, under boost, both sides are going to want the same amount of fuel. I mean, we're going to have a little bit of back pressure on one side, not a lot, because we're not trying to run a lot of boost anyways. Usually 1.6 to 2 liters. Yeah, that's what I thought that was more of a Honda thing. I didn't think that the Grand National guys used that. Disco Potato was a GT28. That was like the SR20 turbo to have. Yeah, I like SR20s. I like the little 510s. GM Magazine tried it was 2-inch EGT. What's your expected weight for the Bonneville car? The weight for a Bonneville car doesn't make any difference. In fact, you are at Bonneville, you are much better off not having, you don't try to lighten the car at Bonneville. Nobody does. In fact, most people add thousands and thousands of pounds, particularly on a rear-wheel drive car, to get the thing to hook up. Because it's not really an acceleration contest. If you have a whole bunch of power, putting power down is the problem. And then, like for us, it's an aero drag versus available horsepower. It's not a weight thing. Why wouldn't we want both exhaust pipes in the turbo? Just to do something different. Disco Potato. Would twin GT30s work on my LP4? Yes. It depends on how much power you're trying to make, but yeah, they would. Yeah, Disco Potato on an SRT4? That's pretty late in the Disco Potato life. Betting on rings because I ordered a new set of steel rings. I think Molly rings have a harder time seating. If you put steel rings in, the steel rings are going to take longer to seat than Molly rings do. And did you drive it around at all and not being boost? Did you ever give it a chance to break in? Running salt seems like a great way to test the corrosion resistance of your wiring harness. It tests everything. I mean, it eats aluminum. It's really not good. Do you think a GT3582 would be okay? Yeah, it definitely would be okay to try. A 318 would be blow through. I'm scrolling. Oh, for the Magnum? Yeah. Mentioned 6.3, 6.9 Mercedes from the 70s. They were really fast. Brian, does your 318 have stock heads on it? And is it a 318 Magnum? Have you done any tests on with really high compression milling heads or fancy pistons? Like, what are you talking about? Like, what's really high to you? And then what if Westech has run a lot of high compression stuff there, but what are you talking about testing though? Like, what do you want it compared to? I have an L33 with a Summit 8720 cam, Turbonetics, TC76, MSD atomic injection, 72 two-door Datsun. Oh, a Datsun 510. What do you think of MSD for boost? Only 5 to 7 pounds. An MSD atomic? Is it the 4-hole throttle body thing? 340 heads, 202.16. I honestly think you're going to be. I'm honestly leaning toward that turbo maybe being a little small for your combination. Dean, what about the throttle bodies? Running an NALS needs to run on pump gas, so probably no more than 13 to 1. Okay, so that's not high compression. Like I thought you were talking about 15 or 16 to 1 stuff that they've run there. Not LS stuff. Most of that's big block stuff. But yes, I've run stuff that's 13 to 1 or more. Popped a rocker off my stock 302 rev past 6,500. Valve springs are now on the menu. I've over revved my 302 to 6,500, and it continued to run for another 80,000 miles. So I've missed shifts on nitrous. So it zinged whatever the most is. It did that, and missed a shift. And so I don't think I'd worry about that unless you broke a spring. First car was an 83-200 SX. Yep. Greg, thanks. Oh, Woody's. Okay, you're thinking Woody's. Yes. I like one of my chop lever. Come on. L6 intake on the fuel rails. Okay. Lots of the UK's been the ITBs for ease of the bigger turbos. It's a lot better to have a common plenum. Well, it's required basically if you're going to have a turbo combination. Would you pick a small turbo over a bigger one for a responsive street car? 85% saying yes. That's nothing but good. That's making me think maybe I could keep that stock turbo, but maybe I'll do some like porting on it. Maybe I'll do some exhaust side, like wastegate side porting or hot side porting. After looking at that stock, the stock T2 one, I don't think is as bad. So, but I do have the other one. I think Brian wants that one though. I need to put the 2.5 together. I think that one's all ready to go together too. And on that note, it is time to go, but I'll see you guys all in the morning.